At the Easter party, my greedy daughter-in-law gave me a giant chocolate egg. Inside is the perfect place for you. It was a brochure for a cheap nursing home. I handed her a note. It was the inheritance division, favoring the sister-in-law she despises. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The laughter around the Easter table died the moment I opened that egg. My hands trembled slightly as I held the enormous chocolate egg my daughter-in-law Amanda had presented to me with such ceremony. I picked this one especially for you, Celine, she'd announced, her voice dripping with false sweetness. There's something inside that I think will be perfect for you. My son Richard glanced up from his plate, a flicker of unease crossing his face before he returned to cutting his ham. The rest of the family watched with barely concealed anticipation as I carefully broke the chocolate shell. Inside, nestled where most people would find a toy or trinket, was a glossy brochure. I recognized the facility from its distinctive green. Roof visible from the highway. Whispering Pines Retirement Home. The cheapest assisted living facility in the county, notorious for its understaffing and neglect. Paper-clipped to it was a handwritten note in Amanda's looping script. The perfect place for you. My heart stopped for a moment as the implications sank in. This wasn't a gift. It was a message. You're unwanted. You're in the way. You're disposable. Looked up to find Amanda staring at me, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Behind her, my brother-in-law Edward shifted uncomfortably, while his wife Martha, my dear friend and confidant, watched me with concerned eyes. Well, Amanda prompted, isn't it thoughtful? Richard and I have been talking about how that big house is just too much for you to manage alone, and they have activities for people your age. I'm only 55. My husband's been gone just 2 years. The table had gone completely silent. Richard wouldn't meet my eyes. My nephew stared at his plate. Only Martha looked directly at me, her expression a mixture of horror and sympathy. In that moment, I realized how carefully this humiliation had been orchestrated. Easter Sunday, the whole family present, the dramatic unveiling of the gift. Amanda had planned every detail to maximize my embarrassment and isolation, but she'd made one critical mistake. She thought I was weak. With steady hands that betrayed none of the rage and hurt churning inside me, I reached into my purse and extracted a sealed envelope. I'd been waiting for the right moment to share this news, but Amanda had just handed it to me on a silver platter. What a coincidence, I said, my voice remarkably calm. I have something for you too, Amanda. I slid the envelope across the table. She took it with a confused smile, clearly unprepared for my response. What's this? She asked, tearing it open casually. A thank you card already? I watched her face as she unfolded the paper inside. A copy of my newly updated will and estate plan. Her eyes widened as she scanned the document, her expression morphing from smugness to disbelief. This can't be right, she stammered. Oh, but it is, I replied. I've decided to leave the majority of my estate to Martha. After all, she's done for me since Charles died. It seemed only fitting. Martha gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. Amanda's face had drained of all color. She and Martha had been locked in a silent feud for years, their mutual dislike barely concealed beneath polite smiles at family gatherings. Richard finally looked up. Mom? What are you talking about? But Amanda was already shoving the paper toward him, her hands shaking with fury. Did you know about this? She's leaving everything to Martha, the house, the investments, everything. As the table erupted into chaos, I picked up my purse and stood. Thank you for Easter dinner, I said. And Amanda, thank you for the egg. It's helped me realize exactly where I stand in this family. I walked out with my head held high, Martha's shocked expression the last thing I saw before the door closed, behind me. In my car, I finally allowed myself a moment to breathe. The tears would come later, but for now, there was only a strange, hollow triumph. Amanda had tried to break me with that egg. She didn't realize she'd only cracked the shell of my former self, allowing something stronger to emerge. The morning. After Easter, I sat alone in my kitchen, turning my wedding ring around my finger, a habit I'd developed in the 2 years since Charles died. 30 years of marriage, gone in an instant when his heart gave out on the golf course. Those 30 years played through my mind as I stared at the chocolate egg I'd brought home, now sitting broken on my counter like a symbol of my fractured family. It hadn't always been this way with Amanda. When Richard first brought her home, 7 years ago, she'd been all smiles and charm. "I've always wanted a mother figure," she'd told me, her eyes wide with what I now recognize as calculated innocence. Charles had been charmed immediately. "She's good for Richard," he'd said. Ambitious, like him. The changes were so gradual, I barely noticed them happening. First, it was small comments about the house. "This place could use some updating, don't you think?" Then came suggestions about my appearance. "That hairstyle ages you, Celine." Always delivered with a smile, always just concerned enough that arguing made me seem defensive. After Charles died, the real Amanda emerged. With my grief still raw, she began to isolate me from Richard. Weekend visits became monthly phone calls. Invitations to dinner came with conditions. "Don't bring up politics, Mom. You know how you get." Family photos in Richard's house slowly disappeared, replaced by glamorous portraits of Amanda and her family. I remembered the first time I truly saw the manipulation clearly. It was at Richard's birthday dinner last year. I'd arrived early to help set up, bringing the special whiskey I'd gotten for my son and the family photo album he'd always loved. "Oh, we don't need that," Amanda had said, taking the album from my hands and shoving it in a drawer. "We've planned a sophisticated evening. Reminiscing would just bring the mood down." Later that night, I overheard her in the kitchen with Richard. "Your mother seems confused lately," she whispered. "She couldn't even remember where we keep the glasses, and she's been here dozens of times." "She's getting older," Richard had replied, concern evident in his voice. "Maybe we should talk about options." I'd recoiled from the doorway, my heart pounding. They were discussing my mental capacity, my future, all based on lies Amanda was feeding my son. The kettle whistled, pulling me back to the present. I poured the hot water over my tea bag, watching the color seep out. That's what Amanda had been doing, slowly leaching the color from my relationship with my son, drop by drop, until he could barely see me anymore. The doorbell rang, startling me. Through the peephole, I saw Martha's familiar round face. She had always been more of a sister to me than Charles's actual sister, even before he passed. "I couldn't sleep all night," she said as I let her in. Her eyes were puffy from crying. What Amanda did was unforgivable. "She's been working toward this for years," I said, leading her to the kitchen. "Convincing Richard I'm declining, that I need help. That egg was just the culmination." Martha's gaze fell on the broken chocolate shell. "And the will? Is that real?" I nodded slowly. "I changed it last month. I've seen how Amanda looks at this house, Martha. She's been measuring for curtains since Charles's funeral." Martha took my hands across the table. "But why me? We've always been close, but—" "Because you're the only one who's seen through her," I replied simply. "And because it would hurt her the most." I hadn't realized how bitter I'd become until I heard the words aloud. Martha didn't flinch. "Richard called me this morning," she said quietly. "Amanda told him you're becoming vindictive in your old age. She suggested it might be early dementia." My stomach clenched. "And what did Richard say?" "He's worried, confused. He said Amanda has been noticing concerning signs for months." Martha's eyes met mine. "Celine, she's been laying groundwork, making Richard believe you're slipping away mentally." The realization felt like ice water in my veins. This wasn't just about pushing me aside or getting my house. Amanda was systematically destroying my credibility with my own son, painting me as a confused old woman whose decisions couldn't be trusted. There's more, Martha continued, hesitantly. Richard mentioned that Amanda found some perfect memory care apartments to show you. Apparently, they've been discussing it for months. The Easter egg suddenly made perfect sense. It wasn't just a cruel joke, it was a warning shot. Amanda was accelerating her timeline. "What are you going to do?" Martha asked. I stared at the broken egg, at the brochure still partially visible among the chocolate fragments. For 2 years, I'd been quietly enduring Amanda's campaign, retreating further into myself, hoping Richard would eventually see through her manipulations. "I'm done being silent," I said finally, a new resolve hardening within me. If Amanda wants a fight for this family, she's going to get one. What I didn't tell Martha was the other document locked in my desk drawer, proof of something I'd discovered about Amanda that would change everything. The time for silence was over. It was Martha who first noticed the missing silverware. "Didn't you used to have a full set of your grandmother's silver?" she asked one afternoon as we prepared tea. 2 weeks had passed since the Easter incident, and Martha had made it her mission to visit me regularly. "It's in the drawer where it always is," I said, then froze as I opened the drawer to find only half the set there. "That's odd. I know I had the complete set when I polished it at Christmas." Martha shot me a meaningful look. "And who has access to your house?" The implication hit me like a truck. Richard and Amanda had a spare key for emergencies. Could Amanda be? No, that was too calculated, too devious. But then again, so was that Easter egg. "You think she's taking things?" My voice sounded small even to my own ears. "I think," Martha said carefully, "that making you seem forgetful would benefit her greatly right now." That night, I couldn't sleep. I found myself wandering through my house at 2 a.m., taking inventory of my possessions. The missing silverware, the pearl earrings I couldn't find last month, the photo albums that seemed to have fewer pictures each time I looked through them. I'd attributed it all to my own absent-mindedness, to grief, to aging. But what if it was deliberate? What if Amanda was systematically removing items from my home, counting on me to doubt myself? The evidence mounted over the next few days. I found my reading glasses in a drawer I never use. My address book, with important contacts and account numbers, had disappeared entirely. Small things, easy to dismiss individually, but when viewed together, they formed a disturbing pattern. Then came the dinner at Richard and Amanda's house. I'd gone reluctantly, still sore from the Easter humiliation, but Richard had called personally, sounding genuinely remorseful. "Please come, Mom. I miss you." Amanda greeted me with her usual plastic smile. "Celine, you found the house all right?" "I've been coming here for 7 years, Amanda," I reminded her. "Oh, of course. I just know how confusing driving can be these days," she said with exaggerated concern, shooting Richard a meaningful glance. Throughout dinner, the pattern continued. Amanda would ask me a question, then subtly undermine my answer. "Are you sure about that, Celine? That's not how Richard remembers it." Or worse, she'd correct me before I'd finished speaking, making each small mistake seem like evidence of a larger decline. The final blow came over dessert, when Richard cleared his throat nervously. "Mom, we've been thinking about the future," he began, staring into his coffee cup. "The way you've been lately, the confusion, the forgetfulness." "I'm not confused," I said, my grip tightening on my spoon. "You didn't recognize the Hendersons' daughter last week," Amanda interjected. "She was quite hurt." I frowned. "The Hendersons moved away 5 years ago. I haven't seen their daughter." A flash of surprise crossed Richard's face, quickly hidden, as Amanda placed her hand over his. "See what I mean, honey? The memory issues." "Mom," Richard continued, "we think it might be time to consider downsizing. selling the house. There it was, the real agenda. Amanda's eyes glittered with triumph as Richard outlined their plan. Sell my home, help me move into a senior community, and let them manage my finances. For my own good, of course. I was too stunned to argue. I let Richard drive me home, his awkward attempts at reassurance washing over me like static. Once inside, I sank onto the sofa, my mind racing. They weren't just trying to push me aside. They were trying to take everything. My home, my independence, my dignity. I went to my office and unlocked the bottom desk drawer. Inside was a file. I'd started 6 months ago when I'd first suspected something wasn't right with Amanda. Bank statements, phone records, a background check. And most damning of all, evidence of the massive debt she'd hidden from Richard. Amanda wasn't just cruel, she was desperate. Their perfect life was built on credit cards and loans, a facade maintained by Amanda's extravagant spending. They needed my house, my investments, everything they could get their hands on. I closed the file, a cold clarity settling over me. I'd been too trusting, too willing to blame myself. But now I saw the truth. Amanda hadn't counted on one thing. I might be older, but I wasn't helpless, and I wasn't going to let her destroy what remained of my family without a fight. My phone buzzed with a text from Martha. "How was dinner?" I typed back. "Worse than I imagined. We need to talk. Tomorrow." The game Amanda had started was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. "They're trying to declare you incompetent," Martha said bluntly, setting her coffee mug down with enough force to splash liquid onto my kitchen table. The morning light streamed through the windows, creating a deceptively cheerful atmosphere. For such a dark conversation. "Legally?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Can they do that?" Martha's expression was grim. "Amanda has been building a case. The memory issues, the confusion, the misplaced items, it's all documented. Richard mentioned they've even consulted an elder law attorney." She reached across the table to grasp my trembling hands. "Celine, they're moving faster than we thought." The walls of my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd raised Richard, where Charles and I had shared thousands of meals, seemed to close in around me. I couldn't breathe. "But I'm perfectly fine," I protested weakly. "You and I know that," Martha said. "But Amanda has been poisoning Richard's perception for years. The Richard who used to call you every day for advice is gone. He trusts her implicitly." I pulled my hands away and walked to the window, staring out at the garden Charles and I had planted together. The cherry tree he'd insisted on was in full bloom, a riot of pink against the spring sky. Would this be the last spring I'd see it? "I have proof," I said quietly. "About Amanda's debts, her lies." Martha joined me at the window. "Show me." In my office, I spread the contents of my file across the desk. Credit card statements showing Amanda's astronomical debt. Bank records revealing frequent large cash withdrawals from the joint account she shared with Richard. A background report showing previous bankruptcies she'd never disclosed to our family. Martha whistled low. "How did you get all this?" "After Charles died, I learned a lot about financial investigation. I had to untangle our estate, figure out accounts I never knew existed." I tapped the file. "When things started feeling wrong with Amanda, I put those skills to use." Martha studied the documents, her brow furrowed. "This is damning, Celine. Does Richard know?" "If I showed him now, he wouldn't believe me. He'd think I fabricated it out of spite after the Easter incident." "Or worse," Martha added, "Amanda would use it as further evidence that you're paranoid and need help." We sat in silence, the enormity of the situation settling over us. My son, my only child, had been turned against me by a woman who saw me as nothing but an obstacle to my assets. "We need a plan," Martha finally said. "Something that protects you legally before they can make their move." Over the next few hours, we outlined our strategy. First, I would update all my legal documents. Not just my will, but power of attorney, healthcare directives, everything. Martha would be named as my representative, not Richard. Second, I would document my mental competence. A full neurological workup, cognitive testing, all of it recorded and witnessed by independent parties. Third, and most painfully, I would begin quietly untangling my financial connections to Richard and Amanda. The business investments Charles and I had helped Richard start, the loans we'd provided for their dream house, all of it would need to be formalized and, where possible, withdrawn. And what about Amanda's debt? Martha asked. I stared at the evidence I'd gathered. Using it felt like declaring open war, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. We hold on to it, for now. Over the next 2 weeks, Martha and I executed our plan with military precision. I met with new attorneys who had no connection to Richard or Amanda. I underwent extensive medical evaluations that certified my mental capacity. I restructured my assets, creating trusts that would be difficult to challenge. Through it all, I maintained the appearance of normalcy. I answered Richard's increasingly infrequent calls with the same motherly warmth I'd always shown. I deflected Amanda's probing questions about my future plans with vague reassurances, but inside, something had changed. The hurt and betrayal had hardened into something else, a steely resolve that surprised even me. You're different, Martha observed one evening as we reviewed the last of the paperwork. Stronger. I had to be, I replied simply. They left. Me no choice. The doorbell rang, interrupting our conversation. I peered through the peephole to see Richard standing on my porch, alone for once. It's Richard, I whispered to Martha, my heart suddenly pounding. Without Amanda. Martha quickly gathered the documents from the table, tucking them into her bag. Remember, don't let on that we know their plan. Stay calm. I nodded, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Richard looked tired, the lines around his eyes deeper than I remembered. Mom, he said, his voice strained. We need to talk. I stepped aside to let him in, catching Martha's warning glance over his shoulder. The moment of confrontation had arrived sooner than we'd expected. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. Whatever Richard and Amanda had planned, they were about to discover that underestimating me had been their biggest mistake. Mom, are you home? We need to talk. Richard's voice echoed through the foyer as he stepped inside, running a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture so like his father that my heart clenched despite everything. Martha squeezed my arm reassuringly before slipping into the kitchen to give us privacy. I'm here, Richard, I said, leading him to the living room. What's on your mind? He sat heavily on the sofa, avoiding my gaze. It's about the will. Amanda told me what you did. I settled in the armchair across from him, keeping my expression neutral. And what exactly did I do, Richard? You know what? He snapped, finally looking up. Cutting me out. Leaving everything to Martha. After everything we've done for you. Everything. You've done for me, I repeated slowly. Like suggesting I belong in Whispering Pines? Richard had the decency to flush. That was Amanda's idea, she thought. She was trying to help. Help who, Richard? I leaned forward. Me? Or herself? His jaw tightened. You've been different since Dad died. Forgetful, paranoid, making accusations, the missing items, the confusion, items that Amanda has been systematically removing from my home, I interrupted quietly. Conversation she's been twisting to make me sound confused. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Richard stood pacing the room. These conspiracy theories about Amanda. She's been nothing but supportive, and you repay her with suspicion and spite. I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment to decide how much to reveal. Richard, Sit. Down. Please. To my surprise, he obeyed, sinking back onto the sofa with the wariness of a cornered animal. I want to show you something, I said, nodding to Martha, who silently entered with a folder. And I need you to really look at it, not as Amanda's husband, but as my son. Martha handed him the folder and retreated. I watched Richard's expression change as he flipped through the pages. Confusion, disbelief, then dawning horror. This can't be right, he whispered, staring at Amanda's credit card statements. $87,000 in debt? The cash withdrawals from our joint account? There's more, I said gently. Keep going. His face paled as he reached the private investigator's report detailing Amanda's history. The 2 previous marriages, both to wealthy older men, both ending in acrimonious divorces after she'd secured significant assets. She told me she'd only been married once. To her college sweetheart. Richard's voice was barely audible. Richard, look at me, I said, waiting until his eyes met mine. I'm not confused. I'm not paranoid. And I'm certainly not ready for a nursing home. Amanda has been manipulating both of us, but for very different reasons. Martha rejoined us, sitting beside me in silent support as Richard continued reading, his expression growing more stricken with each page. The missing silverware? He asked. My grandmother's pieces? I nodded. Check the guest room closet at your house. Top shelf, back corner. I believe you'll find them there, along with several other items that have mysteriously disappeared from my home. Richard closed the folder, his hands shaking. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Would you have believed me? I asked quietly. Over her? The silence that followed was answer enough. There's something else you should know, I continued. I've undergone complete cognitive and neurological testing. The results are in that folder as well. I'm perfectly competent, Richard. The only thing wrong with me is that I trusted too much. He stared at the folder in his lap, then at me. The will. Are you really leaving everything to Martha? I've made some changes, I acknowledged. Not out of spite, but out of self-preservation. I can't leave my assets to someone who sees me as an obstacle to be removed. Richard flinched as if I'd slapped him. I never... You were going to help Amanda declare me incompetent, I said, my voice steady despite the pain those words caused. You were planning to sell my home and put me in a facility. Don't deny it. His silence confirmed what I already knew. Why are you showing me this now? He finally asked. Because despite everything, you're still my son, I said simply. And I thought you deserved one chance to see the truth before things go any further. Richard stood abruptly. I need to think. I need to talk to Amanda. Ask her about this. Of course you do, I said, rising as well. But Richard, when she denies it all, when she tells you I've fabricated everything out of jealousy or confusion, or whatever new excuse she invents, remember this moment. Remember that I've never lied to you. After Richard left, Martha and I sat in silence, the weight of what had just happened settling over us. Do you think he'll believe you? She finally asked. I gazed out the window at the cherry tree Charles had planted, its petals now starting to fall like pink snow. I don't know, but for the first time in years I've told him the complete truth. What he does with it is up to him. Martha squeezed my hand. What happens now? Now, I said, a strange calm settling over me. We wait for Amanda's next move. Because there will be one. And I was ready for it. 6 months after that fateful Easter, I sat on my porch swing watching the autumn leaves dance across my lawn. A peaceful silence enveloped the neighborhood, not the tense, suffocating silence I'd known for so long, but a tranquil quiet that felt like freedom. More tea? Martha asked, emerging from the house with a steaming pot. Please, I smiled, holding out my cup. So much had changed since I'd shown Richard the evidence about Amanda. The aftermath hadn't been pretty: explosive arguments, tearful confrontations, and finally, inevitable truths that could no longer be denied. 3 days. After our conversation, Richard had appeared at my door, ashen-faced and exhausted. "You were right," he'd said simply. "About everything." He'd found the missing silverware exactly where I'd said it would be. He'd confronted Amanda with the financial records, which she'd tried to dismiss as fabrications until he revealed he'd verified them independently. The final straw had been discovering she was already meeting with realtors about selling my house, making plans before I'd even agreed to move. "I don't know who she is anymore," Richard had confessed that day. "Or maybe I never knew her at all." The divorce proceedings had begun shortly after. Amanda had fought viciously, claiming half of everything, including the business Richard had built with his father's help. But her leverage had evaporated when her previous marriages and financial deceptions came to light. In the end, she'd accepted a modest settlement and disappeared from our lives. "Have you heard from Richard today?" Martha asked, interrupting my thoughts. "He called this morning. The renovations on his new place are almost done." I sipped my tea, savoring the warmth. "He wants us to come see it this weekend." Richard had moved into a small apartment after the separation, humble compared to the showcase home he'd shared with Amanda. The change seemed to suit him. Stripped of pretense, he was slowly finding his way back to the person he'd been before. My son, Charles's boy. Our relationship was healing too, though the scars remained. We were careful with each other now, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. Some days were easier than others. Some wounds were still too raw to touch. "Celine," Martha said hesitantly, "you've never told me what happened with the will. Did you change it back?" I smiled, watching a red leaf spiral lazily to the ground. "I made some adjustments. Richard will inherit the business interests his father wanted him to have, but the house and half of my personal assets will still go to you." Martha started to protest, but I raised a hand to stop her. "It's not about punishment anymore, Martha. It's about recognizing who was truly family when I needed it most." The doorbell chimed, and Martha rose to answer it. Moments later, she returned with Richard and, to my surprise, his father's old fishing buddy, George. "Mom," Richard said, leaning down to kiss my cheek. "Hope you don't mind me bringing George along. He's been helping me with the apartment renovations." "Not at all," I replied, genuinely pleased. George had been a fixture in our lives for decades, though we'd lost touch after Charles died. Seeing him standing awkwardly on my porch, holding his worn baseball cap, brought back a flood of warm memories. "Mrs. Holloway," he nodded respectfully. "Place looks good. Charles would be proud." As the afternoon unfolded, we sat together on the porch, sharing stories about Charles that made us laugh until tears came. Richard seemed lighter than I'd seen him in years, occasionally catching my eye with a look of understated gratitude. After Martha went inside to prepare dinner and George excused himself to make a phone call, Richard and I found ourselves alone. "I brought something for you," he said quietly, pulling a small package from his jacket. I unwrapped it carefully to find a gleaming silver picture frame containing a photo I hadn't seen in years. Richard, as a little boy, sitting on Charles's shoulders, with me standing beside them, all of us laughing. "I found this when I was packing," Richard explained. "Amanda had hidden a lot of our old family photos. I've been finding them and, well, remembering." I traced the outline of Charles's face with my fingertip, a bittersweet ache filling my chest. "I'm sorry, Mom," Richard said, his voice breaking. "Slightly. For everything. For not seeing what was happening." "We both lost our way for a while," I replied gently. "But we found it again. That's what matters." Later, as we gathered around my dining table, Martha, Richard, George, and me, I looked at the faces illuminated by candlelight and felt a profound sense of peace. This was my real family, not defined by obligation or manipulation, but by genuine care and respect. The chocolate Easter egg that had symbolized my rejection was now just a distant memory. In its place was something far more valuable: the knowledge that I had faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged stronger, wiser, and surrounded by authentic love. As I raised my glass for a toast, I caught Martha's eye and smiled. The inheritance Amanda had so desperately schemed for was never really about money or property. The true inheritance was this: the legacy of resilience, dignity, and the courage to stand firm in your own truth. And that was something no one could ever take away from me.